applies to suits as well.
Okay, let's roll.
All right,
Just get together for dinner every so often.
so I think the reason that the committee is here is to look at the language that may be in a bill that the Senate may or may not be sending over to us some point today. And the task of the committee will be to look at the language and to affirm or disagree with, or whatever you want to do, that either that the language does in fact clarify what has been pointed out as the sticking points in the original bill, clarify without changing the underlying original intent of the bill.
Which bill are we talking about? Are we talking
That's
about the
230.
original bill that was passed
Yes.
by the House,
Yes.
142-0?
No, we are not talking about that
That's the
one.
original bill that we voted on.
That is not the original bill.
That's the original bill.
Look, I don't want to get into any contentious BS in here today, okay? That's what we need to do, and you can either do it or not do it. You know, it's part, you want to have a public process, we'll have a public process. If you don't, we won't. So, you know, the final bill that was voted on, leaving by both
Right.
bodies, was
That's
not
the one
the
that
bill
was
that we
vetoed.
voted 142
Yes,
nothing
I
on.
understand
Okay,
that. There
so-
were two different bills,
Okay.
in essence.
So the bill that was vetoed
Yes.
had language that was of concern, okay? And there was a proposal made by Chris Gray, which is the Senate has now, and if the Senate passes that over to us, our determination is, does the language that Mike will pass out, that I believe everybody's seen a number of times, is it in fact clarifying language without changing the underlying intent? Okay?
I'm still perplexed as to what happened between the time that the administration sent word that there was no problem with the language on the bill as we sent to him, and
Okay, so I'm not here to rehash history.
No, I'm just
but we are here.
questioning on
I don't
whether-
want to be here either, okay? But the fact of the matter is that the bill has been vetoed, and that's why we're here. So let's deal with what we have in hand.
we can't forget history on things.
We're going on the floor at 11 o'clock. I'd like to get through the bill.
I would just like to say, I think what's fair in the discussion as well, and many of you were in the room, is what our intent was as we discussed the language in the conference committee. And there was a lot of things that happened at the end where I could remember the play-by-play of what we intended to do with some of that language and how it ended up being interpreted differently after we passed it. So I think that's fair to discuss, is what were we actually trying to accomplish in that conference committee as
The
well.
underlying intent, yeah. Okay.
Okay, so just a little bit of an official kind of, because the Senate hasn't actually introduced their fixed bill, we don't have that to circulate, but Representative Dean has drafted the same exact bill and had rules approve that for introduction. So we have a House version of the Senate bill that will be voted on today. I didn't want to hand out a draft bill because that's all the Senate has right now, because their Rules Committee has not approved their Senate bill yet. I also have the governor's veto message, if people would like that. And I also have a side-by-side of the changes. You will see what the original language was in S-230, the governor's concern.
Do you have more copies for that?
Of the bill?
Yeah.
Yes, I do. The governor's concern and the proposed fix.
Mike, are these the same, we got earlier in the week, the stuff from Chris Gray that had everything highlighted. Are these the same things just incorporated in this bill?
Yes, the language
Okay.
is exactly the
Okay,
same as
okay.
what you received from Chris Gray earlier in the week. So just to frame the governor's veto message and the issues identified, there were 4 issues identified. First, that the temporary rules for noise from wind generation and the process of using the emergency rules, the governor has interpreted that language as having Vermont be the first state in the country to declare a public health emergency around wind energy. The second issue that he raised is that in the temporary rules that he is reading that language as setting a ceiling for new temporary wind sound standards at a 150 kilowatt, at the sound standard for a 150 kilowatt project that was permitted in Virgins, which is 10 dBA above ambient. The third issue identified was that somehow the requirement to file notice of the CPG for an energy facility in the land records, that somehow that impairs marketability of title and subsequently would deter residential solar. And the fourth issue is that the $300,000 that was intended to be included in the bill to provide funds to regional and local planners for energy planning was unintentionally left out of the bill. And then I can move through the bill and how the language is clarified. On page 17, section 10A, you'll see the fourth issue in the governor's veto message addressed. The $300,000 to the regional planning commissions is reinserted to assist municipalities in implementation of the act. Would you like me to go through all of that language, or should I move on?
Well, I think the only thing that was left out was the 300,000.
Yes. So, you can then move on to page 23, lines 10 through 20. This addresses the governor's third issue, that somehow recording notice will impede residential solar and create a marketability, an issue of marketability of title. Because the governor's veto message addressed residential solar, what this language does on lines 12 and 13 is only requires the filing of the notice if the capacity for the electric generation facility is greater than 15 kilowatts. 15 kilowatt solar is approximately 60 panels. I went on Affordable Solar's calculator to try to figure out what kind of requirements you would need for a residential facility to have to need 15 kilowatts. You basically would have to have only about a half hour of direct sunlight or any sunlight during the day, and it's for all of your solar forever. And so this is a very high standard, and so anything under it does not require to file the notice in the land record, so it would not be required for residential solar. There would be no impact on residential solar from this notice. Shall we move on?
Yep.
On page 28, you'll see the first issue addressed on lines 18 to 20 and going on to page 29. It provides that the standard under 3 VSA 844A, which is the standard for emergency rules regarding imminent peril to public health, safety, or welfare, shall not apply to the rules to be adopted under this section. So the imminent peril standard does not apply to the temporary rules for noise and wind generation. Then you move on, and it says this subsection employs the process set forth in 3 VSA 844, the emergency rulemaking process, solely for the purpose of using an existing rulemaking procedure to adopt temporary rules in a short time frame. So that was to specify the intent of the use of the emergency rules process. Should I move on?
Unless anybody has a question.
Page 29, line 11 through 16, or actually it's going to be a line 11 through 20. This addresses the second issue in the governor's veto message, somehow the wind generation cap is going to be set at the Vermont facility level. So I'm just going to read through all of this. These rules shall not allow sound levels from a wind generation facility that exceeds the lowest maximum decibel level authorizing any certificate of public good that contains limits on decibel levels issued by the board. And here's the key language: for the same category of wind generation facility before the effective date of this section. So category. And remember that the 230 as passed authorized the sound levels for different categories and methodologies for different methodologies for determining the noise levels for different categories. So that was your intent, to have different categories, and now this is specifically referencing those different categories in the temporary rules. It sets forth what those categories are. On lines 15 through 20, for the purposes of this subdivision, there shall be two categories of wind generation facilities. Facilities with a planned capacity of 500 kilowatts or less, net metering, and facilities with a planned capacity as defined in 30 VSA section 8002 greater than 500 kilowatts. So everything other than net metering. So the Vergen's facility CPG would still be a cap, but for the net metered facility. The other Lowell, I think was the last, would be the cap for everything else, which is 45, 35,
30.
45, 30. And so you have the intent of capping for the different categories according to the last certificate of public good issued for those categories. This is a temporary requirement. It's only in effect until at its latest July of 2017. Those are the fixes. That is the only language that has changed. You will see the specific comparison and side by side of the board.
Questions?
Actually, the only thing in my mind, the only thing that I question interpretation of what some of us individually might have thought on the bill as we voted on it the last day. The one thing that I thought was going to be included in it, and I think all of us thought the same thing, and wasn't, was the $300,000. I went out of that room thinking that was in the bill, and it turned out it was not. I questioned a couple of the other things, but, that's, my question didn't amount to anything.
Well, my recollection is that we took that $300,000 out on purpose so that it wouldn't have to go to another committee of jurisdiction.
But then later on, it was added back in.
It was added by the Senate
Yeah,
for the
right,
conference
right.
committee. And when I got a summary from Aaron that day, I called him to say the $300,000 isn't in the summary. And
Because
never got that
we were
clarified.
told that the 300,000 would come out of gross receipts tax on utilities.
Right.
And the other thing is, with the emergency rules, I thought it was a pretty good solution until I found out that I was unaware that there was an attachment to this public health, threat to public health. I would not have voted for it if I had known that at the time. And I knew that we were doing things pretty quickly at the end, and that always makes me a little nervous to not vet it properly. But I think the clarification in here is just very understandable. It's what we wanted to do. And so
Let me share with the committee that on the emergency rulemaking piece, when that was brought to me as a compromise, I looked at emergency rulemaking and I saw what the standard was, and I was extremely concerned about it. I was so concerned about it that I drafted up look-alike language that disconnected the process from the standard that needs to be met for emergency rulemaking. And I took it to Ledge Council, and Ledge Council assured me, and I had a big back and forth with him, oh, you don't need to do this, and you don't want to create another rulemaking process because legislative administrative rules, they get confused. They don't like to have any more than the two rulemaking processes that they have in place. And we've done this before, and there's no connection to it. And I kept saying, show me how there's no connection to it. There's no connection to it because the legislature deems that the standard is met. Well, I may be a simple, stupid individual, but when somebody tells me that the standard is deemed to be met, and I go look at the standard, and the standard says imminent threat to public health and safety, I don't understand the disconnect. There may be a legal disconnect to it. I was extremely uncomfortable with it. It's the very reason that I did not sign the Committee of Conference report immediately. And so I knew that of this potential. But I will tell you that when we walked out of the building on the last day, I thought everything was fine because I was assured that the money was there. So the reason that we're back here initially is because I think within 24 hours I got a call saying, guess what?
Yeah.
They forgot to put the $300,000 back in the bill. And oh God, well isn't it just a drafting error? Can't they just, fix it? Blah, 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 blah. No. Sure.
I think it also says in emergency rules, not only public health, safety, or welfare, and to say that this has not affected the welfare of dozens of people that have come here to testify about sleep deprivation and the having to move out of their houses, I think that doesn't recognize what we've heard from a number of people. So it does affect the welfare of people and enjoyment of their property, and I think we ought to recognize that is one of the conditions of it.
Well, when I was working with Senator Bray and Senator Campion, and we were all working to try to craft a solution, the intent of finding a solution that looked like this was so that projects didn't get in under the wire that didn't have any new standard at all, where the Public Service Board hadn't even considered our intent on trying to set some standards in place that gave people some modicum of comfort until they did the permanent rules. And that's why we came up with this interim solution, and I remember the chairman saying, but it can't be connected to emergency rulemaking. So we called it temporary instead of emergency and thought that took care of the issue. And so when we presented that to the committee, that's the intent that I expressed there, was to have something temporary in place, but not to try and make it about the health and safety issue.
Whether we agree or not, that's not the point on that issue. The point on the issue is that the process was about an expedited rulemaking process to get rules in place until the more lengthy permanent rulemaking process was complete. We never talked about connecting anything to that specific standard.
And the language that was used in S-230 has a history because going back about 10 years, there was language that would be included in bills that would say the agency shall use the emergency rulemaking process to adopt the standard or these rules. And the language, a rule went to LCAR, and LCAR said, oh, this isn't imminent. We see that it affects health or welfare or safety, but it's not an imminent issue. So you shouldn't have used emergency rules. We're not going to approve these emergency rules. We're sending it back to the agency before the agency goes forward with the burden of proof changes. So, and then what came out of that is that we were writing up these different rulemaking processes that wasn't the traditional APA rulemaking, that wasn't emergency rulemaking. It was temporary rulemaking, and LCAR didn't like that. So they wrote a memorandum to the chairs that said, if you're going to do expedited rulemaking, use the emergency rulemaking process. And so the language that we've been using to trigger emergency rulemaking for the temporary rules is the language that's in S-230. And we've done it 6 times over the last 5 or so years, and it has never been a problem. I understand some people might misinterpret that language, because people have different interpretations, but the way that we've been implementing that language for the last 5 years is to invoke the process and not the standard for emergency rule.
I think what's, whether we agree, whether we don't disagree, the entity that is charged with carrying out the rulemaking has issued a public memorandum who has a completely different interpretation of that process. And they say that they would have to, that it would have to be recognized. And I think, Mike, and you can correct me or clarify, that emergency rulemaking has never been done with the Public Service Board before. Emergency rulemaking, to my knowledge, has never been done in a situation where it was a contested situation, like a docket for a CPG can be a contested situation. So there was never an ability for somebody to come in and create a lawsuit environment. Somebody could easily, I mean, I know the fact that it was in the bill that's been vetoed, it has already been used in a filing in a memo for a project that legislature has deemed that this is a threat to health and safety, and Mike's back, so I don't think any of us on the conference committee, when we were doing this, ever said that, or ever said to put that in.
I mean, in other words, we didn't want to declare an emergency.
Right.
That wasn't.
It was all about the process, using the expedited process.
So with this bill, if this bill is changed to include what's here,
Yeah.
as far as some levels are concerned, every CPG will have an authorized maximum sound level, and there would be one of two figures. It would either be for a plant of 500 kilowatts or less, it would be the lowest maximum level that has been authorized in a CPG, or it would be, if it's more than 500 kilowatts, it would be, still would be the lowest maximum that's been allowed in a CPG for that size plant.
That's
Is that correct?
And that's only for that period of time.
Right,
Until the final rules.
Until the final rule comes out, yeah, okay. Just
That's
so
correct.
That's absolutely correct.
So,
Yeah.
in Ledge Council's opinion, the language that you've created now to address these issues clarifies
Yes.
the underlying.
Yes. I think our opinion is that the legislation could have been implemented, but this language definitely clarifies the issues raised in the veto message.
For further clarification, so those two levels, any project CPGs approved in the interim cannot exceed that, but on a case-by-case rulemaking basis, standards can be lower. Is that correct?
Yes, yes.
So it doesn't say that any project over 500 will be 4530. That it will be no more than that, but it can be less.
Correct. Yep.
Mr. Chair, we don't have anything to vote on.
I don't think so.
Can we go to the floor?
Everybody understand? Okay, thanks.
Can I just say though, I mean, there's a slight possibility we're gonna have to come in and vote on things if anything should change from